Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 60, How Early Experiences Shaped Your Identity. Okay, so all month we're talking about reinventing ourselves, doing things over, and continuing to work on simply becoming who we were meant to be. So this week, I want to get into some of the origins of how we build our identity. Now, I know that across many of the podcast episodes, we've actually been talking about this because we've been talking about self-esteem and self-concept and how our first relational classrooms, aka our families, first grade, the neighborhood, they helped shape it. And so today I want to flesh out some of these pieces a bit more thoroughly. So I know I've mentioned in the past the concept of Erikson's developmental stages. Now, if you studied psychology, you may have come across this in high school or college. If not, there's plenty to be had online. I actually went back for a refresher on verywellmind.com, and I've included their link because I'm going to be using some of their charts today to make it simpler. So what Erikson believed was that at certain ages and stages of life, we have levels of ego development, and each one is built upon the other and the ones before it. So these stages go from birth to the end of life, and there are certain ages where we are supposed to complete certain developmental tasks. The idea is that if you went through the stage and accomplished what you were supposed to accomplish, that's great. If that got messed up for you, it can cause problems for you in that stage, but also all the stages thereafter. He believed that each stage of psychosocial development was important, but he placed particular emphasis on the development of ego identity. Now, Erikson calls that the conscious sense of self that we develop through social interaction and becomes a central focus during the identity versus confusion stage, in terms of who am I, of psychosocial development. Now here's the big piece, I think. He says our ego identity constantly changes due to new experiences and information we acquire in our daily interactions with others. As we have new experiences, we also take on challenges that can either help or hinder the development of identity. And that's what we're going to get into today, the helpers and the hinderers. But first, I want to go through the stages. I'm going to do this briefly. You are welcome to go explore this more in depth if you wish. I think it's really helpful to walk through this and give it some serious thought, not only for your own life, but for those around you. All right, so the first stage for an infant is trust versus mistrust. Okay, this is between birth and 1 year of age, and it is the most fundamental stage, obviously. So, because when we're an infant, we're so dependent on our caregivers for everything in order to survive, that developing a basic trust is based on the dependability and the quality of the child's caregivers. So, if the mother or father picked up the child when it cried, fed and clothed them, calmed them down, kept them warm, held them close, we know that secure attachment has a lot more to do with that deep attachment with the mother than it does with being fed. So there's lots of research on that. So the child is utterly dependent, it says, upon adult caregivers for everything they need to survive. Like we said, love, warmth, safety, and nurturing. So if your caregiver failed to provide adequate care and love, you were neglected, the child will then come to feel they can't trust. And they can't depend on adults. They can't depend on the adults in their life. So that's a big deal. If it goes well and a child develops trust, then the child will feel safe and secure in the world. But caregivers who are often inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or rejecting, they really contribute to feelings of mistrust in the children under their care. And that'll give them a basic fear and a belief that the world is inconsistent and unpredictable. And I've also read that they grow up to learn not to trust themselves. So it can happen that if the parents were inconsistent, they didn't know how to love, didn't know how to attach to the child, had drug and alcohol problems, mental health issues, physical issues, that can create problems. Now, it's important to point out that nothing's 100%, and we're not talking perfect here. Erickson believed that successful development was all about striking a balance between the two opposing sides. When this happens, children acquire hope, right? So openness to experience tempered by some wariness that danger might be present. This isn't about perfect. So the next one is stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now, this is when a child is around 2 years old, the stage of no. And this is when kids are actually separating for the first time from the mother. As crazy as that sounds, you become a separate human being. That's why you have your no. And they're just starting to gain a little independence. They're doing little things for themselves, maybe putting their own clothes on, things like that. They want to make choices. They don't want to eat their dinner. They want to pick out what shorts they want to wear because they're looking for that autonomy. And that's why potty training at this age is a big deal, because it gives them more control over their bodies and they're not as dependent. And it gives them, a sense of control. So if that gets messed up for a kid, they can end up feeling shame for their accidents, like if they didn't potty train well or very easily and the parent got frustrated, maybe left without a sense of personal control or a lot of times rebellion against extreme control by the parents. Success means the kid ends up feeling autonomous and that they can trust their own abilities. So it's a really big deal in terms of starting to create your identity. If not, you're left with a lot of feelings of inadequacy and a lot of self-doubt, okay? So again, Erickson believed we need the balance between autonomy and a little bit of doubt, right? Because you don't want self-will run riot. You want kids to have reason and limits as well. All right, stage 3, initiative versus guilt. And this is when a child enters preschool. And this is when they start to assert their power and control over the world because they start directing play and other social interactions. They feel capable. Maybe they can throw a ball. Maybe they can play a game. When they don't acquire these skills, they're left with a sense of guilt, self-doubt, and a lack of initiative, okay? Because the major theme here is that kids need to begin asserting control and power over the environment a little bit. That way they end up with a sense of purpose. Kids, though, who try to exert too much power and aren't checked can end up having a lot of guilt. Next stage, industry versus inferiority. This is when a child is approximately 5 to 11 years old. And so the social interactions are big here, and they begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments and their abilities. Like that's when they start to find out what they're good at. Are they good at math? Can they throw a baseball? Are they good at spelling? What are they good at? And what are the other kids mirroring back to them? What are teachers mirroring back to them? So this is when, kids who are encouraged and commended by parents and teachers can develop a feeling of competence and they start believing in their own skills, right? But those who don't receive a lot of encouragement, or maybe none at all, or maybe there aren't adults that are even paying attention to what the child is good at, or maybe they're shamed and, held in check a little bit too much, to bring them down a notch, so to speak, then they start to doubt themselves. This is also when kids will start out to maybe play an instrument for the first time and try out for sports and things like that. And if it goes very badly for them, even if they have talent, they probably won't use it. I've sat with so many adults who have told me that that's when they shut down their attempts at trying to go out for band or for sports or something like that. And it's very sad because they do have the talent, but that's when they were so vulnerable and they were looking for the world to tell them, can they do this? All right, so the next one, here's a big one, identity versus confusion. Okay, this is during the adolescent years. And it plays an essential role in how we develop a sense of personal identity, right? Because that's going to continue to influence our behavior and development for the rest of our lives. So that's why this is a really crucial stage, Erickson said. Because teenagers need to have a sense of self and personal identity. And a lot of the times in adolescence, that's when we try to figure out who we are. We may try on different identities and different hats and different values and beliefs and hang out with different groups of people. And that's the goal, to explore all of that, to really give thought to what they think matters and what they're interested in. Those who get proper encouragement and reinforcement will have a strong sense of self and feelings of independence. Those who remain unsure of their beliefs and desires, because maybe it didn't go well in the home, because maybe you wanted to be different than your parents and that was too threatening to the family, you can end up with a lot of identity confusion. And that's why he calls this stage identity versus confusion, in terms of confused as to who the hell I am. So when we're talking about identity, a lot of people talk about, what one believes, what they believe in, what they value, and who they think they are in relation to all of those things, what they're passionate about and what they're good at. I would throw that in too. So the next one, intimacy versus isolation. This is when you're a young adult and you learn how to form, or maybe not, intimate, loving relationships with other people. This is when we seek out a mate. This is when, years ago, people would start getting married. Success in this stage, you have strong relationships, while failure can result in a lot of loneliness and isolation. And it covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring all kinds of personal relationships. This is when you hear a lot of people talk about that's when they formed their best friendships, maybe in college or something like that they keep for years. Erickson really believed that we all need close, committed relationships with other people, and I agree. We know that belongingness now is the key to longevity, so that's a big deal. The second to the last one, generativity versus stagnation. Almost middle-aged adults, right? This is when we want to turn towards things that are greater than ourselves. Having children, creating a positive change that benefits the world. Success leading to feelings of usefulness and accomplishment. Failure can result in a shallow investment in the world that maybe you're defining yourself just by how much money you make, kind of thing. This is when we continue to focus on building our career and family. If we do well with this stage, we'll feel like we're really contributing to our home and our community. If not, then we feel disconnected from the world. We can become lonely. We can have a string of divorces. We can have turbulent relationships with our spouses and our kids. Care is the virtue achieved when we handle this successfully, because I think we find deeper meaning at this age too. I think things start to change. People don't care about the outer trappings as much as they do deeper meaning in their life, and how life is also going by a lot more quickly. This is often where you can see the midlife crisis, I think. People get to this point and there's fewer years ahead than behind. And so we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. So the final stage, and this is where a lot of research is coming up now, and it's called integrity versus despair. Okay, this is old age. And basically when we are focused on looking back on our life, a lot of reflection. And this is when you look back on your life and determine whether you're happy with it or not. And if you're proud of yourselves, or do you have regrets around things you did or didn't do? Do you have a sense of fulfillment looking back? Do you feel a sense of wisdom, or do you have regret, bitterness, and despair? Okay. So a lot of the research now, as you've heard, is talking about you don't want to get to this stage and regret things you didn't try. Most people regret more things they didn't try and could have, or good things they could have done and just didn't have the courage to do it, or didn't make the time to do it, rather than things that happened to them. So those who are unsuccessful during this stage will feel like their life has been wasted and they may experience many regrets. Those who feel proud of their accomplishments, conversely, will feel a sense of integrity. All right, so those are the stages of psychosocial development. So hopefully as you were listening, you got a sense of what the purpose is for each stage. And remember, every stage is built upon the ones before it. So if things got messed up for you as an infant or as a toddler, the stages thereafter you were going to struggle to complete. And so I want to talk today about is environments, because you've heard me talk about environments many times and why I think they matter. And I want to go back to something that Erickson said. And he said, our ego identity, how we see ourselves, constantly changes due to new experiences and information we acquire. Remember the mirroring in our daily interactions with others. And he says, as we have new experiences, we also take on challenges that can help or hinder the development of identity. So I want to get into the help or hinder because this is huge. And these are two reasons why I think this is huge. The first one is, wow, can you now see just how malleable we were as kids and how profound your childhood was in terms of impact on who you've become and, what I think most importantly, how you see yourself and what you're capable of, and whether you're okay with that definition. Number two, because of that, the cool thing is this means you can change it. You know, this is why I keep emphasizing with you the impact of creating new environments today, because they have a huge determination on who you end up becoming. We can't do this stuff in a vacuum. And I think we really underestimate, especially in my country where it's still so based on individual determinism, we don't recognize the impact of our environment. I think COVID is really teaching us just how important it really can be. So like Erickson said, there are two things in our environments. There are things that are helpers and things that are hinderers. So I want to do a little bit of a review, and I say review because I think we have touched on these things in previous episodes. And the first one is obvious, it's encouragement. So if you heard encouragement from important people in your life that you thought mattered at that moment, and at that moment that could be your mom, your big brother, your best friend, the band teacher, your first grade teacher, or the coach, where you were encouraged to keep trying, not give up, have hope, pick it back up if you failed, get better at it, practice, that there were things that you could do. Encouragement gives us hope, and encouragement also gives us the vibe that we can do it. I think the unspoken message there is we don't think that people would be encouraging us if they didn't really see that there was a possibility, right? So I think we kind of know that deep in our heart. So that's the other reason why encouragement is really important. And plus, you know, our brains are wired for negativity. We can be so vulnerable trying something new that we can take the easy way out and want to throw in the towel. And we need encouragement to keep going. They use this in sports all day long. We need to use this in our life and see why it matters so much. Another good helper that you hear me talk about all the time is accurate mirroring. Okay, not blowing smoke up your behind when you're a 5-year-old and everyone gets a trophy. I'm talking about accurate mirroring around your real talent, your real gifts, your real wonderful, unique qualities about your personality too. Like maybe your awe for nature and your family just loves to see that, or your gifts to help animals, or your musical ability, or your love for writing. So accurate mirroring, mirrors we can look into and get the truth. Now, some parents can do this a little differently because they're afraid of encouraging us too much. But accurate mirroring means no one's lying to you, but they're also holding up a mirror that holds up the idea of possibility for you to look into. The other thing I think is a good helper is instruction and guidance. So maybe parents were encouraging and all that, but they did not provide guidance on how to learn how to throw that ball, or how to do math or write or get organized or have good social skills, because parents may have been too stressed or busy or whatever. So we need instruction and guidance too. Oftentimes this can be because of low income status as well. Families just don't have the resources, either they themselves to help their kids or to hire someone to teach them or coach them or mentor them. But we need instruction and guidance when we're little. It helps us gain a sense of mastery. The helpers allowed you to have your feelings, right? Especially if they were negative ones that maybe the family had a hard time tolerating. You were allowed to have your feelings no matter what. You may not have been allowed to have whatever behavior you wanted, but your feelings were validated and you weren't crazy. Your thoughts were validated. That if you thought something was unfair, no one tried to talk you out of that or said you were crazy. Or that you were selfish. Your ideas and your dreams were also validated, even if they were outlandish at the time. That no one really shut you down. They said, wow, that's really cool. That way you could decide, right, when you're 18 or whatever, whether you wanted to follow said grandiose dream. That no one tried to talk you out of it. You know, I think about every famous activist or thought leader or game changer. When you read their story or listen to them speak, they'll talk about how they were given encouragement and help along the way. It's the hero in the journey, right? Every epic story is based on that core dynamic that we can all relate to. That people show up along the journey to walk us as far as they can walk. And they're there to help and encourage and guide. I want to finish the helpers with, maybe even the difficult lessons that we use as challenges. I mean, sometimes I think in the biggest way, boy, can they help us choose, right? They can make you more determined when you get frustrated with trying something. Maybe sometimes the challenge is what we need to get real and get serious with ourselves, especially if we were a little ambivalent as a 10-year-old trying to learn how to ride a bike. So those are the helpers. There's a million more ways that you could have had helpers in your environment. I just want you to think about maybe the ones that you had along the way and how important they were. I want you to think about what if you didn't have that fourth grade teacher pull you aside and tell you how good you were at writing. What if you never heard that? Would you have pursued that? What if you didn't win awards? What if no one applauded? What if no one pointed out how well you draw or how well you sing or how well you coordinate things or create? I want you to really think deeply about, were you allowed to have your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas? Or did the family need to keep you in a safe box? Families can do this without trying to harm the kid. They're just trying to keep them safe. So what are the hinderers? And I'm only going to go through a short list of these as well. I'm sure there can be a million more I haven't even thought about, right? I mean, the most obvious one that we've talked about many times are hearing shaming messages from your family. The people in your life whose opinion mattered most to you, your mom and or dad, older siblings, cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, and then later on, kids in the neighborhood, first grade teacher, your first coach, those people who helped shape your idea of self. If you receive shaming messages about you, like you'll never be able to play that sport, or why are you bothering to do that? It's not like you can make any money doing that when you grow up. There's a million different ways that we can hear shaming messages. A big one is because the parent struggles with perfectionism. And so maybe a little kid is just learning to love to draw and they're drawing all over the page and the parent's freaked out because they're drawing outside the lines or they're making a mess with the finger paint or something like that. And here this little Picasso is trying to create something beautiful and who knows where it'll take them. It doesn't take much to squash that desire to do something with that creativity and talent and passion. So shaming messages about you that at the end of the day, you weren't going to be good enough no matter what. And no matter what you did wasn't going to be good enough, especially if it wasn't being compliant to what the parents wanted you to do at that moment. Siblings can do this too because they're jealous and they're not getting enough parental love in appropriate ways. So they can really retaliate against your talent and they can make you feel like crap and they can make it difficult for you want to pursue things. When we're kids, we're not supposed to worry about taking care of the family's feelings, right? While we're trying to take care of ourselves or we're trying to figure out who the hell we are. We're not supposed to feel responsible for other people's ego while we're doing that, especially not our parents' ego. Now, in healthy families, your siblings wouldn't do that. They may tease you a little bit because of their basic anxiety as a kid, but they would not be menacing or nasty. In unhealthy families, that happens because that child is hurting. And when siblings are nasty with each other, it's just a fight for parental love because there's a lack thereof. Another big hinderer, and we've talked about this before, is receiving questioning of your feelings. Like maybe there's something wrong with what you feel, or you shouldn't feel that, or you don't feel that. Some people are flat out told that's not true. You have no reason to be mad. Maybe you were ridiculed for how you felt, or for expressing your feelings. If you laughed too hard, if you cried when something was sad or upsetting or hurt you physically. If you were ridiculed, it gave you the vibe, that's not okay, and therefore you are not okay. See the ego identity creation here? If you were publicly embarrassed or bullied, especially if you struggled with something like stuttering, speaking out loud, maybe in gym class, things like that where you had to perform in some way, or maybe the way you were dressed, or you had to wear glasses, or how you spoke, things like that. If you had a speech impediment, if you had any kind of perceived handicap in any way, it hindered your ability to see yourself as good enough. All right. Another big one is if you had any type of guilt or manipulation. I want you to go back to some previous episodes, and I've referenced a few of them in the show notes because, again, it's so crazy making, and it creates such a dissonance between who we think we are in the moment and the mirrors around us. So if you are manipulated or guilted, that's AKA you're not allowed to think and feel and need what you really think and feel and need, like we've talked about. Because that is not going to go over well. You're just made to feel like shit if you do anyway. So if your family was what I call a fun house of mirrors, well, there's a lot of damage that really could have been done there. And here's the kicker with manipulation. It's not as overt. No one's maybe smacked you or screamed at you or said horrible things to your face. But that's worse because then they did it with a smile. So you think you're crazy and it didn't happen. It did happen. It did happen. So there's a little bit more work to unearth that stuff. I think it's far more destructive because, again, what everybody tells me is, my dad called me a jerk and said I was worthless. Okay, and as awful as that was, Mary, I knew how ridiculous it was, and I knew I wasn't crazy. It's the people where mom smiles across the dinner table and says, "You sure you want to do that, sweetie?" And that's harder to really dissect and see how effing abusive that can be and why. Because that stuff is so insidious. So manipulation and guilt. And what about the vacuum? What about parents, like we talked about a moment ago, that are too poor and they just can't, right? They're too busy. They're working 2 jobs, maybe too drunk, too wasted, too stressed out, or maybe just too self-absorbed with their own childhood wounds, right? To encourage you, to promote you, and give you opportunities to discover the real you. If they haven't done it for themselves, they may want this for you, quote unquote, but they don't really sit down with you and look you in the eye and say, honey, I really believe in your talent, and I want to know what your mom and I can do to support you here. How can we support you better? I mean, that takes vulnerability and emotional maturity, right? So that vacuum can very well be, they're very well meaning, but they just can't do it. They can't put it out there for you. Or maybe they just were too caught up in fill in the blank to give you the proper attention that you needed. Now, kids who grew up with a sibling who maybe had a handicap or a medical condition or was a train wreck and the family had to spend all their time and energy and money on your brother, there wasn't going to be time and energy and money for you, right? The other thing is if you had really anxious parents who had trauma in their past and or just a long history of anxiety and self-doubt and self-esteem issues, they're the ones who say, be careful, be careful, be careful. They're not the ones who say, hey, why don't you go out and take a risk today and see what you can do? The hell with it. that can be more limiting than we realize because, again, your subconscious doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality. And so it takes that message in, day out, day in, day out. And even if we rolled our eyes, we still took it in and internalized it and applied it. The other area to think about in your family are maybe the cultural, ethnic, or religious values that may have been really restrictive for you and made it difficult for you to be unique. So maybe, being who you really wanted to be, maybe it was that artist, maybe it was that activist when you were 17, maybe it was someone who, had a different gender identity or sexual identity. And you're growing up, let's say, in a Christian home or another culturally, opposing home where that's really difficult to be who you are. So I want to take those things into account as you look back. And finally, a big one, I think becoming parentified. Now, what does it mean when you're parentified? It means you had to grow up too fast. Typical examples are you have any kind of drug abuse or mom was too depressed and couldn't come out of the room, or parents were working 3 jobs. They couldn't be home, take care of your little sister, so you had to do it. So instead of being a 9-year-old, you had to pretend to be an adult in the family. And if we have to be parentified because the family needs us to be, because damn it, mom's passed out and ain't nobody cooking dinner, or maybe it's a single parent home and the single parent is just overwhelmed because the other parent's not being a grown-up. When grown-ups aren't being grown-ups, kids end up stepping in and becoming parentified, whether they want to or not, because there's this deep down desire to fix the family. And some people believe it's because, hey, if my family ain't going to make it, I ain't going to make it. So it's almost like biologically built in for survival. So they will step into the vacuum almost every time. And it's sad because then they have to skip over developmental stages like Erickson talked about. They don't get to find out who the hell they are as adolescents because they're too busy maybe working the extra job after school to put food on the table because dad can't hold a job, or mom's using, or the family's too poor or has been struck by such adversity. It's not always parents acting out. Sometimes it's really sad. It's not what the parent wishes for the kids, but there's just not enough support. So the choice is either you do whatever needs to be done, or do you do you? And doing you meant you could be silly and just be an 8-year-old, or be a neurotic 15-year-old and be in your room and do developmentally appropriate things. One of the big key indicators that you're parentified is you have a hard time and had a hard time relating to kids your own age. You're like, oh my God, these people don't get it. They don't get me. I can't relate. You weren't allowed to do certain activities, or maybe you didn't even have a desire, right? You wanted to do grown-up things. You wanted to hang out with older people. Those are some indicators that there's some parentification there. So those are the hinderers that I see to healthy ego identity development. Now, again, we're not going for perfect, but my hope is that as you look back, you might start putting some puzzle pieces together as to maybe where things went wrong for you. Like, look where you struggle. Like, if you have a love you, I hate you relationships, and when people get too close, that's when you run or blow it up, there are attachment issues there. There's basic trust of other people. You want to look back to your early, what you know about, early mothering for you. What about your adolescence? How did that go? Did you even do an adolescence? Or did you end up being 40 when you were 20? Because you had to be. Maybe you skipped over that. So think back and try to explore perhaps where you weren't able to develop in certain stages. Now, for most people, they did some of this stuff, but maybe not completely. Maybe it just doesn't feel like there's closure there. And remember, the stages build upon the ones before it. So the healing can often require us to go way back, even earlier than we wanted to, and that's okay. I want you to know that intuitively you will go back as far as you need to go, and you will do things to complete that step today. And it's really cool. And if you have kids, you can get away with it because you can do kid stuff and you won't look silly. You will have urges, crazy urges to do things. What do you think the midlife crisis is about? It's usually about someone not completing adolescence. I mean, think about what adult stage should you, quote unquote, be in today? Like, what are your thoughts about that? Does it feel like there's a mismatch between maybe your chronological age and your maturational age? Like, how old do you really feel emotional maturity wise, even though you might not admit that to anyone? I just want you to admit that to yourself today. That'll give you a good clue. And don't beat yourself up. If you feel a hell of a lot younger than you should, it's not your fault and you can fix it. Because the cool thing is you can certainly do some healing today and have a little mini do-over for yourself. I mean, there's some things we can't go back and replace. I get that. You can't go to your senior prom if you didn't go. But there are things you can do today to heal some of that stuff and make it right in your life. Again, back to that midlife crisis. I mean, that's why people act out and they do crazy stuff because they never let themselves be a crazy adolescent. Maybe they got married too young. You know, people who have kids too young, maybe in high school, they never got to complete that identity piece. And I see this all the time when I work with couples because one person either steps out or wants out and does like a 180 in their personality and their spouse is like, what the hell is happening? Because they didn't do that before they got married. Ideally, we should do that before we get married to anyone. But no one's going to tell you this. And people are like, oh, I'm good. I'm 32. I'm good. I did all that. No, maybe you didn't. And the urge to do this is almost, people tell me they can't not do it. The pull is so magnetizing and so strong. So your environments today is what I finally want you to focus on this week. I mean, have you replicated earlier toxic environments where you're still not getting what you need? Have you yourself just made your box too small and too comfortable? I want you to look at all this stuff. Look at maybe some anxiety and depression symptoms that you might be having. Are you feeling happy? Are you where you want to be in life? So Erickson's development is important this month, I think, as we look at our identity, who we are, as we get older. Are we happy where we are? Why are we not? Looking at early environments, and again, looking at your environments today for growth and change, if that's where you want to go. Remember, this is a discovery process, so please make it a gentle, compassionate, loving one. This is not to shame and blame your caregivers either, like we say. Hurt people, unfortunately, end up hurting people. My encouragement is you just take this journey in a positive and very hopeful way, and you will come to appreciate how profound it can be. I love to watch people go through this and discover who they always were, but didn't get a chance, right? To walk through the developmental stages in an appropriate way, or maybe not be able to complete them at that time. You can do it now. That's what's great. So allow the healing, do the work, and see what unfolds. And again, I encourage you to go back to earlier episodes where we talk about early childhood in more depth than I think I did today, if you need to, so you can really go back and assess maybe what happened and what you can do today to heal some of that. All right. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you stay healthy, stay grounded, continue to hold on to hope, focus on the good inside of you because I know it's there, and you try to find that in other people. That's your challenge this week. Be sure to check out the show notes at ownitpowercast.com. And if you need to, sign up for the newsletter if you don't already get it on Tuesday. That'll give you all the bonus downloads. You can also go back to previous newsletters and get the downloads for the older episodes. All right. So pay it forward. Keep focusing on you. And I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.